Welcome to Where Old Gods Sleep. Find a comfortable position, take a slow, deep breath, and let the day gently fall away as we begin. In the late blue hush of Egypt, when the Nile breathed through its reeds and the temple stones held the day's last warmth, the people of Unu spoke softly of Ra, the old sun lord, whose bark crossed the sky and whose eye saw farther than any hawk. Above the fields, the western cliffs darkened. Along the riverbank, frogs began their small evening songs, and the lamps in the houses burned with a thin smell of oil. There was a time, the priest said, when the world was still young enough to tremble beneath a god's sorrow. Ra had grown ancient in his brightness. His bones were silver. His words were flame. The people he had lifted into daylight had become restless beneath him. They whispered against the sun. They forgot the weight of his rising. And in that old story, Ra called the gods into council, not in a hall of gold, but in the hidden place where the sky listens. The gods gathered around him, Shu of the air, Tefnut of the moisture, Jeb with the earth in his limbs, Nut bending like night over them all. Ra's anger was not quick. It was the anger of a father who has watched too long. From his brow came his eye, fierce and shining, the goddess who could become a Thor in tenderness and Sekhmet in heat. She went into the world like a red wind over the desert edge. The story grows quiet there, for sleep does not need the harshness of old fear. It is enough to know that Sekhmet moved with the terrible certainty of noon. The fields emptied. The people hid beside mud brick walls and under woven roofs. Even the river seemed to lower its voice when she passed. She was not cruel in the way mortals are cruel. She was a command made visible, a flame obeying the hand that lit it. But when Ra looked down, his heart changed. The old Sun Lord saw not enemies, but his living children. He saw their clay cups, their little granaries, their doorways swept at dusk. He saw mothers pressing sleeping infants close in the darkness. The command he had given returned to him like a stone in the chest. It is a strange mercy when a god is strong enough to regret. So Ra called for jars of beer. He called for red ochre, ground fine as dust from the earth. The servants of the gods mixed the beer until it shone like a lake of red under morning light. Before Sekhmet's feet, they poured it across the fields, over the low ground where the dawn would soon spread. 7,000 jars, the old tellers said, or more than any hand could count. By night it lay still. By dawn it glimmered. Sekhmet came with the sunrise. She saw the red flood upon the land and bent to drink. The beer was sweet, heavy with grain and sleep. She drank again, and the fire within her loosened. Her steps slowed. Her eye softened. The terrible lioness sank among the reeds as the sun climbed over Egypt. When she woke, the rage had left her. Thor's gentleness looked out through the face that had frightened the world. Ra did not speak of defeat. He did not need to. He had spared what he had made. In later years, people filled bowls with red beer for the goddess. They lifted cups in festival not to remember terror, but to remember its ending. In the shadow of temple columns, with sistrums trembling like small rain, they gave thanks that even the old gods could turn aside from wrath. Let that red dawn lie softly beside you, a sign that mercy can arrive before the day fully wakes. From Egypt's quiet river, the night drifts toward older reeds, where another god will speak through a wall and spare a listening man. Long before Babylon's towers rose high, when Sumer's cities were bright islands in the flat land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, there lived a wise man named Atrahasis. His city smelled of wet clay, sheep wool, barley bread, and bitumen warming in the sun. At evening, the canal water turned violet. Date palms leaned over the banks. In the courtyards, old women pressed signs into clay tablets while children slept near the grinding stones. Above that land, the gods kept their houses. Enlil, lord of wind and command, heard the noise of human life rising from the plains. Plows creaked. Hammers struck copper. Songs passed from roof to roof after dark. To mortals, it was simply living. To the weary god, it was a sound that would not cease. The old story says that the gods grew troubled by humankind's multiplying footsteps. They sent hardship, and the people endured. They sent dry winds, and the people prayed. Again and again, Atrahasis listened for the god who had always favored cleverness and life, Enki, lord of the deep sweet waters beneath the earth. Enki's wisdom did not crash like storm. It moved under thresholds. It seeped up through wells. At last, the god swore a terrible oath. A flood would come. No god was to warn mankind. No mouth was to break the decree. In the high assembly, the decision settled like a sealed tablet. But Enki knew the shapes that mercy can take when a promise has trapped the tongue. Atrahasis slept in his reed house near the water. The night was heavy. The riverbanks were still. Then a voice came, not to the man, not exactly, but to the woven wool beside him. "Wool," said Enki, "listen. Reed wool, remember." The god spoke as though to the house itself, while Atrahasis lay with his eyes open in the dark. He heard the warning hidden inside the words. The voice told the wool to tear down the house and build a boat. It told the reeds to gather living seed, beasts of the field, birds of the air, and the breath of family. It told of pitch and timber, of a roof sealed against the waters, of a door that must be closed when the appointed hour arrived. Atrahasis rose before dawn. He did not tell the city all that he knew. Some stories say he gave an answer that sounded like an ordinary leaving, a man obeying his god. He gathered wood. He smeared bitumen black and shining along the seams. He brought grain in sacks, jars of oil, lambs, birds, and the small household things that carry a life from one shore to another, a cup, a grinding stone, a wrapped bundle of seeds, a clay figure of a god with worn edges. When the sky finally broke, the people heard more water than any human memory could hold. The tale of that flood is vast, but here, in the hour before sleep, it may pass like rain beyond a shutter. The boat lifted. The old world disappeared beneath cloud and wave. Inside, Atrahasis waited in darkness, smelling pitch, damp wool, and frightened breath. After many days, the waters quieted. The boat came to rest. Atrahasis opened the door to a world washed bare and silent. He made an offering. Smoke rose thin and blew into the emptied sky. The gods drew near to the scent, hungry for the order of things to begin again. Enlil saw the saved man and was angered at first, for the oath had been bent. Then Enki spoke. He did not boast. He reminded the gods that life, once made, is not a jar to be smashed whenever the room grows noisy. Let there be limits, he said in his wise way. Let the world be kept in balance. But let it continue. So Atrahasis lived. The seeds were planted. Animals stepped carefully onto the mud. The canals would one day be dug again. Children would again sleep under reed roofs while the rivers murmured beyond the door. May you hear, in the soft wall of the night, the kindness that knows how to speak without breaking. Beyond the flood-washed plain, the lamp moves westward to Ugarit, where a sick king waits for a healer shaped by a merciful god. At Ugarit, where the sea wind touched the palaces of the northern coast and the scribes pressed wedge-shaped marks into damp clay, the old people told of King Keret. His city stood beneath a sky of stars bright over the Levantine shore. Cedar beams darkened the halls. Bronze bowls caught the lamplight. Outside the gates, the road ran toward vineyards, dry hills, and the far tents of wandering tribes. Keret had known loss. His house, once full of voices, had grown hollow. The benches were empty. The sleeping rooms kept too much silence. In that grief, he lay down one night and wept until the pillow was damp beneath his cheek. Then El, the ancient father of gods, came near in dream. El was old as mountain stone, gentle as a deep well, and his beard was like the foam of distant seas. The god spoke to Keret and gave him a road to follow. The king was to wash himself, make offerings, gather his people, and journey toward a bride whose name would restore music to his halls. Keret obeyed. He went through dust and heat, through the smell of leather shields and cedar smoke, and in time he returned with Huria, a woman of grace. Children were born. The palace filled again with small footsteps. Yet mortals forget even after a god has answered. Keret had made a vow to the great lady Athirat, and the vow lay neglected. Years passed. Then sickness entered the king's body like a shadow crossing a courtyard. He weakened. His lips dried. The servants moved quietly. His children stood by the bed and watched the candle burn low. In the city, people whispered that the king who had once been lifted by divine kindness might now slip beyond all help. In the high places, the gods saw him. Bull, lord of storm, asked who among them would drive the sickness away. The assembly fell still. The old gods could command wind and sea, but not every god wished to bend close to a suffering bed. Then El, the merciful father, took clay and word and breath. He shaped a healer, a small bright being whose name carried the sense of driving pain from the house. She was called Shattercat. She did not come with thunder. She came like a night bird crossing the palace roof. Through the cedar darkness she moved, past guards who did not stir, past curtains hanging still in the warm air. She entered the chamber where Keret lay. The bronze basin beside him held water gone cold. A cup of herbs stood untouched. On the wall, a lamp made shadows of the king's thin hands. Shattercat leaned over him. She touched the sickness and drew it away as one might draw a thorn from cloth. The old words say she washed him clean of it. The fever loosened. The king's breath deepened. Color returned slowly, like dawn entering a room one finger at a time. His children, who had stood in dread beside the bed, saw his eyes open. The mercy was not loud. It did not erase every sorrow that had come before. Keret still had to rise carefully. He still had to remember the vow he had left behind. But the god had not abandoned him to his forgetting. El had looked on a failing mortal and sent a healer small enough to enter a room in silence. At morning, Ugarit stirred. The sea flashed beyond the walls. Scribes would press new marks into clay. Servants would lift the shutters. Somewhere in the palace, a child who had feared the worst would hear the king's voice again and carry that sound like a hidden jewel. Rest now with the thought of a healer crossing the dark so gently that even the sleeping guards do not wake. From the cedar halls of Ugarit, the night follows a silver branch toward Ireland, where an old sea god teaches mercy through loss returned. In Ireland, when Tara rose green and pale under the moon, King Cormac mac Ed kept his hall among the ridges of Meath. The grass around the royal mound was wet with night. Horses stamped softly in the dark. Inside, the fire burned low, and the bronze rim of a drinking cup shone among the shadows. It was said that Cormac judged wisely, that his words had weight, and that his people trusted the steadiness of his hand. One evening, a stranger came over the plain. He was not dressed like a beggar, nor like a warrior seeking a seat at the feast. In his hand he carried a branch of silver, and from it hung apples that gave off a music no harp could match. When the branch was shaken, wounded hearts grew quiet. The sick forgot their pain. Those heavy with grief felt sleep come over them like a cloak laid carefully across the shoulders. Cormac desired the branch, not greedily, but as one desires a remedy for all the unrest of a kingdom. The stranger agreed to give it, but asked a price. Cormac consented before he knew the weight of his promise. One by one, the stranger took away those dearest to the king, his daughter, his son, and then his wife. Each loss struck the hall like a bell heard under water. The branch remained, shining in Cormac's hand. Its music could still calm others, but it could not fill the empty places at his own table. After a time, Cormac followed the stranger into mist. Tara faded behind him. The land grew strange. He crossed a plain where a white horse moved without sound. He saw houses that seemed built of light and shadow together. He came to a great dwelling where the air smelled of apple blossom though no orchard stood nearby. There, the stranger revealed himself as Manannan Mac Lur, the sea god, keeper of hidden islands and bright otherworldly halls. Manannan had not taken Cormac's family into harm. He had brought the king through bewilderment to teach him what cannot be learned while everything remains in its proper place. In that quiet hall, Cormac saw marvels. A house was thatched with white bird wings. A fountain flowed through shining stones. A host sat at ease, untouched by age. There was food without hurry, and silence without fear. Manannan set before Cormac a cup of truth, a vessel that would break when false words were spoken and become whole again when truth returned. Then the sea god asked the king what he had learned. Cormac had worn a crown. He had held judgment over quarrels, land, cattle, and honor. Yet in the mist he had felt how fragile possession is. A branch may sing sweetly while the heart remains unsheltered. A king may rule widely and still be led like a child when the gods choose to teach. The mercy came when Manannan lifted the veil. Cormac's wife stood before him unharmed. His son and daughter were there, bright-eyed, as though they had only crossed into another room and waited. The ache in the king's chest loosened. The silver branch had not been a theft, but a passage. The loss had been real in the way dreams are real while one sleeps, and the return was real in the way morning places the world back into the hand. Manannan gave Cormac the cup and let him go home. The king returned to Tara with those he loved beside him. In his hall, when words grew tangled, the cup would answer plainly. When grief rose, the branch would sing. But Cormac remembered most the mercy of the God who had taken only to return, hidden only to reveal, and frightened only to soften the heart into wisdom. May the music of that silver branch pass over you now, easing every room within you that has waited for return. The branch's song fades northward into fir trees and black water, where a mother calls on Ukko for honey from the sky. In the far north of the Kalevala lands, where pine forests leaned over dark lakes and the winter stars burned with a hard white patience, the old singers told of Lemminkainen. He was handsome, restless, quick to boast, and quicker still to follow desire down a dangerous road. His mother knew the sound of his steps better than any harp. She knew when pride had tightened his shoulders. She knew when trouble had begun walking beside him. Lemminkainen went north to Pohjola, the shadowed country of Lehua, to win a bride from the cold halls beyond familiar fields. There he was given tasks that no careful man would ask for at midnight. One task led him toward Tuonela, the land of the dead, where the black river moved without wind and a sacred swan glided across the water. The river of Tuonela was no ordinary stream. Its banks were quiet as closed eyes. Its reeds did not rustle. The ferryman's oar, when it dipped, made almost no sound. To go there was to step near the place where names grow faint. Lemminkainen, being Lemminkainen, went anyway. The old song tells that he fell there, not in a battle fit for boasting, but by hidden danger. For sleep's sake, the harshness may be folded away. It is enough that he did not return. His comb at home began to bleed, as in the ancient sign, and his mother saw it. She did not wail into helplessness. She tied up her dress, took iron in hand, and set out for the dark river. She asked the trees. She asked the road. She asked the moon and the sun where her son had gone. At last the sun, who had seen what others had not, told her where to search. The mother went to the river of Tuonela and brought with her a rake with a handle long enough to reach into sorrow. She drew the waters again and again. From the black river she gathered what had been lost. Piece by piece, gently, patiently, she brought Lemminkainen back to the bank. She laid him on the ground as a mother lays a sleeping child on a bed. She fitted him together with hands that did not tremble, though grief stood beside her like a second shadow. Yet the body was not breath. The song was not yet returned to the singer. So she called to a bee, small golden wanderer of fields and flowers. She sent it upward, beyond the ordinary blossoms, beyond the meadows of the world, to the halls of Ukko, the high god of the sky. Up there, above cloud and cold air, were ointments no earthly meadow could make, honey of life, balm from the stores of heaven. The bee flew. The path was long. It passed over the roofs of villages, over blue lakes like pieces of night left on the earth, over the last trees and into the white reaches where Ukko kept thunder, rain, and blessing. When it returned, its wings were heavy with sweetness. The mother took the honey and touched it to her son. The first balm did little. She sent the bee again. The second brought more strength. Still she did not cease. A third time the bee climbed to the sky and came back with the deepest medicine, the mercy held in the high god's keeping. The mother anointed Lemminkainen's limbs, his chest, his mouth. A breath stirred. His eyes opened as though waking from a night too long. He spoke, and the black river lost its hold. Ukko's mercy had not come as lightning. It had come in the feet of a mother standing at the edge of death, and in the wings of a bee carrying sweetness through the cold. Lie still now, and let that sky honey rest on the places in you that have grown tired. From Tuonela's silent river, the night turns toward white cloth and cool clay, where Obatala learns to guard the fragile forms of humankind. In the sacred stories of the Yoruba people, before the towns were full of drums and market voices, the world waited below the sky like a wide, wet promise. Above it was the realm of Olajime, high and bright beyond human reaching. Among the Orisha was Obatala, robed in white, quiet in bearing, a maker with patient hands. His color was the color of clean cloth, chalk, snail shells, and morning mist before the sun grows strong. The earth was not yet shaped for human footsteps. The old story says Obatala came down from the sky with a chain, a shell of earth, a hen to scatter it, and the authority to make land rise from the waters. Where the soil spread, hills and fields began. Our life, the holy place, became the navel of the world. Palm trees lifted their crowns. Rivers found their beds. The first paths waited for the first feet. Then Obatala began to shape human bodies from clay. He worked as a potter works in shade, with water nearby and dust soft under the palm. He rounded shoulders. He formed fingers, eyelids, mouths, and backs. Each body lay still until a Lehua would give the breath that only the highest one could give. In those first hours, creation was quiet. The clay held every possible face. But Obatala, in one telling, drank palm wine and grew unsteady. His hands, usually careful, wandered. Some bodies came out bent. Some were small. Some carried marks others would later misunderstand. Some had limbs shaped differently from the rest. Some had pale skin. The maker's white cloth was no longer perfectly clean of sorrow. When his clear mind returned, Obatala looked at what he had made. He did not turn away. He saw that these forms, too, were waiting for breath. He saw that the clay had not asked for the trembling of the hand. He saw that a maker's mistake can become a wound in the world unless the maker bends low and takes responsibility for it. There, in the old Yoruba memory, mercy did not mean pretending nothing had happened. It meant protection. Lehua gave life. Breath entered all the bodies. Eyes opened. Fingers moved. Voices began to search for names. The people stood upon the earth, each carrying a mystery of form. Obatala, humbled, made a vow. Those whose bodies bore the signs of his unsteady shaping would belong especially to him. He would be their guardian. They would not be cast aside as accidents. They would be sacred beneath his white cloth. From that time, Obatala's worshippers honored whiteness, white garments, white beads, cool water, soft speech, and offerings without heat or harshness. The Orisha of clarity remembered what confusion had done. He forbade himself the palm wine that had clouded his hand. His mercy was a long mercy, not a single rescue, but a shelter extending from the first clay into every village where a vulnerable person needed dignity. In the courtyards of Yorubaland, when moonlight settled on carved posts and calabashes, the story could be told without anger. The god had erred. The high god had still breathed life. The one who shaped imperfectly became the one who protected. Under Obatala's cloth, difference was not a sign of abandonment, but of nearness to the Orisha who had learned tenderness through regret. The night around iLife grew deep. Clay cooled. The first human slept under the gaze of the gods, and the white-robed maker kept watch over those who might otherwise be forgotten. May you rest beneath that quiet white cloth, where every fragile shape is allowed to belong. From the cool clay of Ife, the path enters a winter forest, where mercy wears frost on its beard and listens for a gentle answer. In the Slavic winterlands, where birch trees stood pale as bone against the night and the snow made every sound small, people once spoke of Morozko, Father Frost. He was not merely weather. He was the old cold given shape, a tall figure in a furred cloak, his beard bright with ice, his breath turning the forest silver. When he passed, fences creaked, rivers slept under glass, and stars sharpened above the rooftops. In one village, near the edge of the deep woods, there lived a quiet girl with hands rough from work. She rose before dawn to carry water. She swept the floor. She fed the stove. She endured harsh words from those who should have warned her. Her father was weak of will, and the woman who ruled the house had a heart closed tight against the child. The winter grew hard. Snow lay on the roof like a heavy white animal. The stove smoked. The trees beyond the village made a dark wall. At last the stepmother commanded that the girl be taken into the forest and left there. The father obeyed with tears in his beard, wrapping the girl as best he could and driving the sled between the black trunks. The runners hissed over the snow. No birds called. When they stopped, the world felt made entirely of cold. The girl was left beneath a fir tree. She did not curse the house. She did not shout after the sled. She drew her thin shawl around her and sat quietly as the night deepened. Snow gathered on her sleeves. The fir branches bent above her, holding little shells of moonlight. In that stillness, Morozko came. He moved from tree to tree, cracking the bark with his cold. His staff touched the ground, and frost flowers opened on the snow. He leaned over the girl and asked, in the old way, whether she was warm. Her lips were stiff. Her fingers ached. Yet she answered gently. Yes, Father Frost, she said, she was warm enough. Morozko circled lower. The cold thickened. Again he asked whether she was warm. Again she answered with respect, not because she was strong enough to defeat winter, but because something in her refused to become as cruel as the world had been to her. A third time he asked, and by then her voice was small as a coal under ash. The old Winter Lord listened. He had heard people curse him. He had heard doors slammed against his wind. He had heard axes bite angrily into frozen wood. This answer was different. It was not flattery. It was a fragile courtesy held up in a place where no one would have blamed her for bitterness. Mercy stirred in the blue heart of Frost. Morozko bent his cloak around her. Warmth came, not summer warmth, but the deep-hidden warmth that keeps a seed alive beneath snow. Furs appeared around her shoulders. A chest of gifts rested under the fur, cloth, jewels, and garments bright enough to make a poorhouse blink in disbelief. By morning, when the father returned expecting sorrow, he found his daughter alive, calm, and shining softly in the winter air. The tale has a shadow, as many old tales do. Another child came later with scorn in her mouth and found that winter has another face. But here, for the hour of sleep, the mind may rest with the first girl under the fir. She was not saved because suffering is good. She was saved because the old Frost recognized gentleness and chose not to break it. The sled carried her home over snow that no longer seemed empty. Behind her, Morozko disappeared among the trees, leaving the branches glittering in the pale dawn. May the frost outside your thoughts grow quiet, and may the small warm coal within you be seen. From the blue forest, the night crosses to a smoky hall in the north, where Thor's anger pauses over a cracked bone. In the old north, along the road toward the giant lands, Thor drove his chariot under a sky crowded with stars. The wheels rang over stone. The two goats who drew him, Tangrisnir and Tangjoster, breathed clouds into the cold. Beside him rode Loki, sharp-eyed and restless, while the mountains ahead rose like sleeping giants under the moon. By evening, the gods came to a small farmhouse. It stood low against the wind, with turf on the roof and smoke leaking from a hole in the dark. The family inside had little to offer but shelter. A man, a woman, their son Thialfi, and their daughter Roskva received the travelers as best they could. The room smelled of smoke, wool, and the sour tang of milk. A single lamp trembled near the wall. Thor was not a delicate guest. He was thunder in human shape, red-bearded, broad-handed, with Mjolnir near him and hunger after a day's travel. Yet he gave as well as took. He slaughtered his goats for supper, as he often did, because these were no ordinary animals. He told the family to place every bone carefully on the hides after the meal. No bone was to be broken. In the morning, his hammer would call the goats back to life. The meal warmed the house. Meat steamed. The children watched the gods by firelight. Thialfi, young and hungry, listened to Loki's whispering, or perhaps only to the ache in his own stomach. He took a thigh bone and cracked it for the marrow inside. It was a small sound. The kind a house makes and then forgets. But the old worlds remember small sounds. At dawn, Thor rose. He laid the bones upon the hides and lifted Njolna. The hammer passed over them with a power older than iron. The goats stood again, shaking themselves as though waking from sleep. But one limped. Its hind leg faltered. Thor's face changed. The farmhouse seemed to shrink around his anger. The rafters darkened. The family trembled. Thunder does not need a storm cloud when it stands in a room. Thor looked at the broken bone, then at the people who had broken his command. His hand tightened around the hammer. Outside, the morning was very still. This was the turn in the tale, the place where a god might crush a poor house for a poor boy's hunger. But Thor did not. His anger was real. The wrong was real. The goat's limp was visible beside him. Yet he looked at the family huddled in the smoke and did not bring the roof down. Instead, he accepted recompense. Thialfi and Roskva would go with him as servants and companions. They would leave the low house and enter the wide roads of gods and giants. It was not a light fate, but it was life, and more than life. It was a place in story. Thialfi became swift, so swift that later tales remembered his running. Roskva, too, followed the Thunderer's road. The children who had begun as frightened figures beside a hearth became known in the company of Thor. The broken bone did not vanish from memory. The goat still limped. Mercy does not always erase the mark of an action. Sometimes it changes the ending that action might have had. Thor stepped back into his chariot. The goats pulled. The wheels turned toward the giant lands. Behind them, the farmhouse stood unbroken in the morning light, smoke rising peacefully into the sky. Inside, the parents breathed again, and the silence after thunder felt almost holy. Rest with that paused hammer, and let the night remember how strength may stop before it falls. From the northern hearth, the road bends toward a broken sky, where Nüwa gathers stones to mend the world. In ancient China, when the world was still near the breath of its makers, the goddess Nüwa looked upon rivers, mountains, villages, and fields with the tenderness of one who had shaped living beings from yellow clay. The people told that she had made humans by hand at first, bending over the mud with care, forming faces one by one. Later, with a cord dipped in clay, she cast droplets that became many more. All belonged beneath her gaze. The land rested under 4 pillars of heaven. Mountains held the directions. Rivers flowed in their beds. Smoke rose from early hearths in thin straight lines. At dusk, the sky was a great bowl, and the stars appeared where they were meant to appear. People slept without fearing that the roof of the world might shift above them. Then came the breaking. A great being, Gong Gong, struck against Mount Bujo, the pillar in the northwest. The old stories differ in the quarrel, as old stories often do. What matters is the wound. The pillar cracked. Heaven tilted. Earth sank unevenly. Fires moved where fires should not move. Waters rose from their courses. The stars seemed to slide from their stations. People looked up and saw not a sheltering sky, but a torn thing. Nüwa heard them. She did not gather the gods to argue blame. She did not turn from the cries of clay-born beings because they were small. She descended into the shaken world and began the work of repair. Around her, the rivers ran wild. Trees leaned in strange directions. The air smelled of smoke and wet stone. Villagers stood on high ground, holding children close, watching the goddess pass through the broken light. Nüwa gathered stones of 5 colors. In the old telling, they were blue, red, yellow, white, and black, the colors of the ordered world. She made a fire great enough to soften them. The stones melted into a luminous substance, like dawn caught in a bowl. With it she patched the torn places in heaven. Where there had been a wound, there was again a surface for night to spread across. Yet the sky needed support. Nüwa found a great turtle, vast as a hill in the waters of the old world. From it she took what was needed to raise the directions again. The tale comes from a time when creation could be stern, but here the image may rest in symbol. The deep creature lent its strength, and the 4 quarters were steadied. The northwest remained a little lower, which is why, people said, the sun and moon travel that way, and why the rivers of China lean toward the sea. She gathered reeds and made ash to quiet the floods. She drove away the dark forces troubling the land. She worked until the world could breathe. This was mercy on the scale of mountains. Not a single hand spared, not one house saved, but the whole fragile dwelling of humankind repaired by a goddess who remembered the feel of clay between her fingers. She did not make the world exactly as it had been. A slight tilt remained. Rivers still ran east. The heavens still bore the memory of mending. But people could plant again. Children could sleep. Hearth smoke could rise without being torn sideways by the panic of the sky. When night returned after Nüwa's labor, the stars settled into their dark fields. The patched heaven shone faintly where her stones had cooled. Beneath it, the first humans looked up and learned that even a damaged world might be held together by divine hands. May the mended sky above this hour seem wide enough to hold you without fear. Under that repaired heaven, the night crosses the sea to Hawaiʻi, where a flower becomes mercy for 2 lovers in the rain. On the island of Hawaiʻi, where volcanic slopes descend toward dark water and mist moves through the upland forest, the old stories remember Pele. She dwelt in fire, in crater glow, in the red breath beneath black stone. At night, when clouds lay low over Tlaloc and the higher trees stood against the sky, people spoke carefully of the goddess whose beauty and anger could both change the land. There was a young man named Hawaiʻi, strong and graceful as a tree after rain. His heart belonged to Lehua, whose presence was like a blossom opening in mountain mist. They moved through the forest paths together. Ferns brushed their ankles. Birds called from hidden branches. The air smelled of wet leaves, lava rock, and flowers cooled by cloud. Pele saw Hawaiʻi and desired him. The goddess was not accustomed to refusal. Fire moves where it wills. Lava remakes the ground beneath its own red silence. Yet Hawaiʻi's heart had already chosen. He would not leave Lehua. He spoke with respect, but his answer remained firm. In the old tale, Pele's sorrow and pride fled together. She touched him with divine power, and Hawaiʻi became a tree rooted in the volcanic soil. His arms lifted as branches. His body darkened into bark. His voice vanished into leaves. The forest stood still around him, as though every fern and bird had heard the change. Lehua came and found him. She knew him, though he no longer had a human face. She wrapped her arms around the trunk and wept. Her tears fell into the moss. The mist thickened. The mountain held its breath. Pele's fire had answered refusal with transformation, but the grief left behind rose higher than anger. It reached the other gods. They looked on Lehua beside the tree. Some tellings say they could not undo Pele's act. A god's change, once rooted, may be hard even for gods to loosen. But mercy does not always restore the old form. Sometimes it finds a form in which love can remain. So the gods changed Lehua into a blossom upon the higher tree. Her red flower opened among his leaves. She was no longer separated from him. The tree and blossom stood together on the mountain, drinking rain, holding mist, feeding birds with nectar. Where there had been punishment, the gods placed companionship. Where there had been loss, they made a joining that wind and weather could not easily part. In Hawaii, people have long said that when a Lehua blossom is picked, rain may fall, because the lovers have been separated again and tears return to the forest. The saying is tender, and like many tender things, it carries warning inside beauty. Leave the blossom where it grows. Let love remain with its tree. Let the old mercy stand undisturbed under the clouds. At night, the higher forest is quiet. The trunks are dark. The blossoms, in moonlight, are more shadow than flame. Pele's crater glows far away, but here, among the mist, the tale is not of fire's hunger. It is of the gods who heard weeping and answered as gently as they could. The lovers were not given back their first life. They were given a second shape. The forest kept them. Rain visited them. Birds came and went, carrying the story from branch to branch. May you sleep like a blossom left safely on its tree, held close in the soft rain. From the Hawaiian mist, the night descends toward a green mountain of rain, where Tlaloc keeps a garden for those the waters have taken. In the Valley of Mexico, where Lake Texcoco once held the moon in its dark water and the island city of Tenochtitlan rose among causeways, the Nüwa people spoke of many roads after death. Some roads were long and dry. Some passed through wind, stone, and shadow. But there was one place under the keeping of Tlaloc, the Rain Lord, where the air stayed green. Tlaloc was old, goggle-eyed in the carved images, with fangs like the force of storms and jars of rain held in the mountains. His helpers kept the waters of the world, mist, springs, hail, thunderclouds, and the rain that taps softly on maize leaves. Farmers feared him and loved him. Without his gifts, the fields cracked. With too much of his power, rivers climbed their banks. So offerings were made to him with care, and mountains were watched as houses of weather. His paradise was called Tlalocan. It was not the ordinary underworld. It was a garden behind rain. Their maize grew tall and tender. Flowers opened without withering. Water ran clear through channels and pools. The air was full of wet earth, green leaves, and the quiet sound of abundance. Those who belonged to Tlaloc by water, lightning, certain illnesses, or the touch of storm were said to go there, not to a road of thirst, but to a place of endless spring. A story may be carried in the old belief like a seed in a folded cloth. Imagine a small household near the lake at the hour before dawn. The reed mats are damp. A clay bowl stands by the door. In the fields, maize plants wait for rain. The people know the Rain Lord's moods, and they know that not every life ends beneath a peaceful roof. When water takes someone, grief enters the house with wet feet. It sits beside the hearth. It touches every cup. Yet the elders would speak of Tlalocan. They would say that the one lost to water had not gone wandering without shelter. The Rain Lord had opened his hidden garden. The path did not lead through dust. It led through mist, through the inside of a cloud, through a mountain door where drops shone like beads on stone. There, the soul would hear running streams. There, flowers would lean close. There would be food, greenness, and the cool mercy of shade. Tlaloc's mercy was not simple, because rain itself is not simple. It can feed and it can frighten. It can lull a child to sleep on a reed mat, and it can make the lake rise over its edges. The old gods often carry both faces. But in Tlaloc, the frightening water was gathered into kindness. What had taken was made to receive. What had overwhelmed was made to shelter. In temple precincts and on mountain slopes, people left offerings. They placed small things before the rain powers: food, paper, copal smoke, bright tokens of need. The smoke curled upward in the damp air. The mountains kept their silence. Clouds gathered where the god stored his jars. In the season of rain, the first drop struck the dust, and the smell of earth rose as though the world had been forgiven. At night, when Lake Texcoco lay dark and the city's lights trembled on the water, Tlaloc seemed near. Not above, not far away, but just behind the veil of falling rain. A place where grief could imagine its beloved not cold, not lost, but walking among leaves that never failed. May the sound of rain become gentle around you, like a garden gate opening in the dark. From the green rain garden, the final path turns to a quiet shrine, where a child holds fast to Shiva's stone and mercy stops at the threshold. In the ancient lands of India, where temple bells carried over riverbanks at dusk and oil lamps floated like small stars upon the water, there lived a boy named Markandeya. His father, the sage Mrikandu, and his mother had prayed long for a child. Their hermitage stood among trees, with a path worn smooth by bare feet and a shrine where the stone linga of Shiva rested cool beneath flowers and water. Before Markandeya was born, his parents had been given a choice. They might have a son dull of spirit who would live many years, or a radiant child whose life would be brief. They chose the bright flame, though they knew how soon it might be taken. So Markandeya came into the world loved with a tenderness sharpened by time. Every laugh was precious. Every morning felt like a gift counted carefully. The boy grew gentle and devoted. He gathered flowers for Shiva. He poured water over the stone. He recited sacred names while the forest listened. At dawn, birds stirred in the branches. At evening, smoke from the hermitage fire curled into the darkening air. His parents watched him with joy and sorrow mingled, for the appointed day drew nearer. It was said that Markandeya would live only until his 16th year. When that day came, the sky was calm. The river moved as it always had. The lamps were lit. Nothing in the trees announced that fate had reached the door. Markandeya went to the shrine and embraced the linga of Shiva with both arms. He did not run into the forest. He did not hide beneath his parents' roof. He held fast to the god he loved. Yama, lord of death, arrived to do his duty. In the old stories, Yama is not merely cruel. He is order. He is the keeper of the boundary every creature must one day cross. He came with his noose, dark and steady, riding the path no mortal can bar. The hermitage grew still. Even the leaves seemed to wait. Yama cast the noose toward the boy. But Markandeya was clinging to Shiva's stone, and the noose encircled the linga as well. In that instant, the still stone was no longer still. Shiva emerged from it, vast and awakened, his presence filling the shrine like storm contained in a single breath. The lamps flickered. The river seemed to pause. Death itself had touched what belonged to the great god. Shiva faced Yama. The tale is fierce in some tellings, but here at the edge of sleep it may be softened. Shiva did not need rage to be immeasurable. He needed only to stand between the boy and the noose. The Lord of the Threshold met the Lord beyond thresholds, and mercy spoke with a power older than fear. Markandeya was spared. Shiva granted him life beyond the limit written for him. Some say he became deathless, forever 16, a sage blessed by devotion. His parents' grief was lifted before it fully fell. The hermitage breathed again. The flowers at the shrine looked newly opened. The water poured over the linga shone in the lamplight like a river returning from darkness. This mercy did not deny that all beings are fragile. It did not make the world careless of endings. It showed that love, prayer, and divine grace could meet at the very place where fate seemed sealed. A boy held a stone in the dusk, and the god within the stone answered. Later, Markandeya would be remembered as one who saw vast ages pass, one who witnessed worlds rising and dissolving like foam on cosmic waters. Yet in the quiet heart of his story, he remains a child at a shrine, arms wrapped tightly around the only refuge he knows. The night is deep now. The old gods have given their mercies: red beer, reed warnings, healing wings, silver branches, sky honey, white cloth, blue frost, a paused hammer, mended heaven, rain flowers, green gardens, and a stone that opened. Let Shiva's stillness hold the last lamp of the hour for you, and let sleep come without fear. Here the stories fold their hands in the dark, and the old gods wait quietly until they are remembered again. Thank you for spending this hour with Where Old Gods Sleep. If this brought you a moment of peace, consider subscribing. Rest well and sleep deeply.